Every software system changes. That isn't the challenge. The challenge is containing the impact of change. For decades, software engineering has evolved around one central idea. When something changes, you should update it in one place whenever possible. That principle has shaped nearly every major advancement in software architecture. So the question isn't whether software changes, it's how we design systems to survive it. Software engineering has spent decades learning how to manage change. We build reusable components, shared services, APIs, data layers. Every layer exists for one reason: reduce duplication so change becomes easier. Reuse isn't simply an optimization, it's how software scales over time. Think about functions like send email, save document, calculate route, and checkout. These aren't rewritten every time they're needed. They're implemented once, then configured with different inputs, different users, different destinations, different currencies, different documents. Same implementation. Thousands or even millions of uses. That's how software engineering manages change. Something interesting happens, though, when we build our automated test suites. We often create another test, and another, and another. Each one represents a different scenario, different data, different users, different browsers, and different regions. But underneath, they're often performing the exact same business workflow. Instead of varying the inputs, we frequently recreate the implementation. Same behavior, multiple implementations. Software engineering learned to reuse behavior, and testing made tremendous progress. We abstracted selectors. We built page objects. We created fixtures, utilities, and shared helpers. Those are all valuable improvements. But notice what's missing. Where is the architectural layer for business workflows? Where is the equivalent of reusable business logic? That's the gap we're interested in exploring. Rather than speculate, let's analyze a real playwright project. Not a synthetic example, not a toy project, a real test suite from GitHub. We'll see what happens when we examine it from an architectural perspective. All right, now this file contains 3 authentication scenarios: a successful login, invalid credential testing, and a locked-out user. At first glance, this is well-written, modern playwright automation. The project uses fixtures, shared setup, page objects, and data-driven testing. The before each block initializes the test environment, and each scenario exercises the login page object with different inputs and expected outcomes. So this isn't an example of poor automation. The selectors and browser interactions have already been abstracted behind page objects. But page objects primarily create reuse at the user interface layer. They don't necessarily reveal whether the same business workflow has been implemented multiple times. That's what we're about to find out. So I'm going to copy this and paste it into our analyzer tool, which is available online for you to use anytime. Okay, so this is where I'm going to paste the test script. All right, while it's analyzing, let me give you an idea of what it's doing. Rather than looking only for identical lines of code, the analyzer examines the behavior represented by the tests. It looks for business workflows, shared process steps, scenario variations, and places where the same underlying behavior may have been implemented more than once. The goal is not simply to identify duplicate syntax. 2 tests can use different method names, different data, and different assertions while still representing the same underlying business workflow. That type of structural duplication is much more difficult to identify through a conventional code review. Okay, the analyzer has identified 3 authentication scenarios: a valid login, a data-driven invalid login, and a locked-out user. Each serves a different purpose, and the analyzer isn't suggesting they should be combined or removed. What it has discovered is that all three belong to the same workflow family: user authentication. Each scenario follows the same business process: initialize the session, navigate to the application, authenticate the user, and verify the outcome. What changes are the inputs and the expected results, not the underlying workflow. So these aren't three identical tests. They're three different scenarios built around the same business process. And remember, this pattern was discovered from just one small test file. That raises a much bigger question. If the analyzer can identify a workflow family from roughly 100 lines of code, what might it discover across an enterprise automation ecosystem with thousands of tests, multiple repositories, and years of development? That's where the challenge becomes difficult to solve manually. A developer can understand a file, a team can understand a repository, but very few organizations have visibility into how business workflows are implemented across their entire automation ecosystem. Now let's open the workflow consolidation page. Here, the analyzer has extracted the shared user authentication workflow. The common business process is represented once, while each scenario preserves the behavior that makes it unique. The valid login still verifies successful authentication. The invalid login remains data-driven. The locked-out user still validates its specific error condition. Nothing has been removed. The coverage is the same. The scenarios are the same. What changes is the architecture. Instead of maintaining the authentication workflow in multiple places, it's maintained once, while each scenario contributes its own data and expected outcome. That's the difference between component reuse and workflow reuse. Page objects help teams reuse user interface interactions. The analyzer extends that architectural thinking to the business workflow itself. And remember, this insight came from just one small test file. Imagine what it could reveal across your entire automation ecosystem. What we just saw wasn't about removing tests. It wasn't about reducing coverage. It was about separating shared behavior from scenario variation. Capture the business workflow once. Then vary the inputs. Different users, different browsers, different regions, different devices, different currencies. The workflow stays the same. The number of scenarios can continue to grow without multiplying the workflow itself. That's how software engineering has managed change for decades. There's no reason test automation shouldn't benefit from the same architectural principle. Because every duplicate workflow becomes another place where change introduces maintenance and instability. If you're curious whether workflow duplication exists in your own test suite, the analyzer is free for you to use at the URL below. I'd love to hear what you find.